I want to follow up on yesterday's episode about productivity and vertical integration, and I want to tie it into the antitrust conversation that is, obviously very prevalent in the United States. And my conclusion is that we will have a lot more concentration in markets because of higher productivity entrance into many, many different markets. In other words, software companies will enter markets such as banking, education, transportation, and because they're the higher productivity companies, they will end up dominating the whole value chain, and that will, I think, open up new questions in terms of antitrust, because they're not going to do it. Actually, they're not just that they're not going to do acquisitions. It's anathema for them to make acquisitions because they don't care about any kinds of incumbents. What they care about is simply their higher productivity approach towards solving problems in particular markets. So let's say if you have banking, you will have maybe Apple, maybe Tesla or X or somebody like that entering the market and become a bank or a telco. Elon Musk just announced that he wants to do something along those lines. A payment service and a telco based on the Twitter platform and based on Starlink. I guess Tesla is the most prevalent example of vertical integration and market dominance. And the question, of course, is how should we deal with this as a society? How should we deal with this as investors? This is not even on podcast. It's September 8, 2023. This is Cream Telco. For the day, the fund is down 3.4%. The market is down 25 basis points. For the year, we're up 114.4%. The market's up 15.2%, and we're outperforming by 99.2%. So yesterday's episode really opened my eyes. I discussed a paper that was presented at the SIDE conference in Stanford. And the paper was about productivity and how productivity is sort of a driving factor for companies to cluster in value chains. In other words, companies with similar productivity will try to do business with each other. This was, I would say, a relatively harmless paper. The author certainly was trying to solve some problems, but I think it's a much, much bigger picture that he's pointing out here, which is it's not that companies with similar productivity try to cluster. It is that any industry where productivity is dispersed in the value chain is not going to survive, and you will have a consolidation along the line of the highest productivity player in the industry. And because very often that is very difficult. In other words, you have dispersion in a value chain, and you will not see the companies adapting to the highest productivity provider. What's going to happen is vertical integration. This is my thesis. It's a prediction. I'm happy to make that prediction. And what that means is, this is sort of the economics version of software eats the world, which is that the highest productivity providers typically are software companies. And because software is expanding its reach, particularly now with generative AI, we will see entrance into completely new markets, such as banking, education, transportation, and telco, for example. So some of the biggest industries will be driven by software companies. And the biggest culprit in this whole situation, of course, is Elon Musk, who, I don't know if it's intentional or unintentional, but he's definitely vertically integrating across many different markets, thus opening up himself, of course, towards massive wealth creation and, of course, also scrutiny. Now, from an investor's perspective, this is how you generate wealth. So it's all nice and good. That's why we're invested in Tesla. We also have a position in NVIDIA for similar reasons. NVIDIA is going to be the AI provider across many industries other than Tesla, and possibly either vertically integrate upstream or just capture all the profit, a little bit like Apple does today in the mobile space. So now the episode today is leans towards a podcast that I just listened to from Luigi Zingales and his collaborator in the Capitalism podcast series. Excuse me, I forgot her name. Yeah, I'm sorry. She's a journalist. She wrote about Enron. I really apologize. But the thing is, what they talk about here is antitrust, generally antitrust. There's a lady on the podcast in this most recent episode She's a professor from Stanford working for antitrust, the antitrust division of the government, and so on and so forth. The quick conversation about antitrust. And I think antitrust is a really important topic in economics, and in particular for any kind of free market observer, because you want to prevent the free market from eating itself. That's really what antitrust is supposed to. The problem of massive power that comes with free markets, because free markets are exploiting inequalities. They're not just making them, but exploiting them. Inequality in ability and in acumen, in sometimes luck, and so on and so forth. So you will have winners and losers, and the winners keep getting bigger, and that's a problem, of course, because no matter what, you will have a problem with monopolistic buyers and sellers, and you don't want that. That's kind of what antitrust is supposed to deal with, and I think economists and lawyers in the antitrust division of the government are trying their best. I mean, I don't want to be cynical here. Of course, you can be cynical like everything else in the government. You can also ask yourself, why do we have an antitrust division when the biggest monopolist of all is the government itself, sucking money from hardworking people, 37 trillion in debt, and so on and so forth. That's a whole different conversation. Let's just assume that we have a public service called the Department of Justice, which is trying to keep our markets free, and the people who work in those divisions have all good intentions, trying to keep our markets free. So the question now is, how do you do that? How do you keep those markets free? And you can, of course, attack mergers. That's the traditional way antitrust works. That's where the name comes from, the trust thing. So you don't want people to collide, to buy each other, merge, and then have market power. That's, I would say, a pretty complicated solution, but it's pretty straightforward in the sense that at least you know the process. What I'm talking about is a lot more subtle. Okay, you have high productivity providers usually coming through the software window, entering new markets. Tesla is entering the transportation market for now, and the energy market, those two. Now, Tesla is not a pure software company, but it has the software type of productivity. So it makes it the most productive supplier in, let's say, the transportation industry, and therefore there is, our prediction is that they will vertically integrate across the value chain and become a dominant player in the transportation market and also in the value chain. And the reason they're doing this is because they are driving the productivity across the value chain. It's been shown that, they make their own seats, for example, they make their own audio equipment, and they're even vertically integrating upstream into mining of nickel. And the reason is always, or most of the time, is not to have market dominance necessarily, but to dictate quality, speed, and iteration. So it's about iteration. That's really what productivity means in sort of, I would say, the first part of this century. We're going away from market power a la Carnegie Mellon, or a la Andrew Carnegie, or a la, JP Morgan. We're also going away from market power a la Procter & Gamble or Coca-Cola. You own the distribution, you have power over channels. The real power, the real winner here is the one that can iterate fast and make very quick corrections of errors, make them at low cost, and also not have high cost of errors. So what that means is that you want to have a flexible production line. You want to be flexible and able to adapt according to circumstances. This is really what productivity means. This is the mentality that is going to drive the winners of this, at least first part of this century. And what we're going to see in the next 10 to 20 years is what we're already seeing. It's a much higher concentration of wealth creation. So it doesn't necessarily mean a higher concentration of companies and firms and those sort of things. In fact, that's another podcast. But we'll see a lot of people working in low productivity industries that are protected, such as healthcare and education, and we'll see actually very few people working in the wealth creating industries, which are those that let's say Tesla is driving, or SpaceX and Nvidia, and to some extent Amazon, Microsoft. So all the big Silicon Valley companies are in that business. That's why they are big, and that's I think going to continue. And the question now here is, of course, how are we dealing with this? So again, the real driver of market power is going to be a flexible, highly iterative production value chain. So that's what the winners of the near future will be building. Tesla is one of them. Musk said it several times. The product is the machine. The machine that builds the machine is the product. And the machine that builds the machine has to be, iterative. It has to iterate fast. Now, fast is relative to the product. It takes them 5 years to come up with 4680, but it, took, other companies 20, 30 years to change the way they fuel or store power in their, transportation vehicles. So 5 years is relatively fast, and the next iteration is going to be 3 years, and so on and so forth. It's about speed. It's about iterating fast. It's about harnessing the knowledge which is created in academia and science and translating it into technology. And again, make the errors, make them fast, don't make them too expensive, and also the error correction itself shouldn't be too expensive. Just as a side note, this is exactly why, for example, nuclear power is not able to win over, because nuclear power is the exact opposite, right? It has very, very long cycles with almost no iterative. You can't iterate, and you can't make mistakes. And if you make a mistake, it's terribly expensive. So technologies like that have a very, very hard time surviving. And that's why nuclear power is just a political solution right now. It's not a market solution. So back to the conversation here again is, we're going to have a highly iterative producers who will vertically integrate across value chains and become market dominant. And the question now is, how do we deal with this from an antitrust perspective, right? Do we look at efficiency? That's what most economists look at. And actually, this is intuitively the right way to look at, because you don't want to look at just prices. You don't want to look at volume, like how many companies are in a market and those sort of things. In fact, it's going to be anathema to that kind of perspective, because you'll just have one company dominating markets. The same way online retail is dominated by Amazon. You have, cloud is, there's two companies, really, maybe three if you add Google. Google's not really making money in the cloud, so that's a different animal there. But like you have, typically you're going to have one, maybe two companies winning in that market, and you have language barriers or cultural barriers. Like Facebook is not very strong in Russia. They have their own Facebook there, and China has their own Facebook variants, and so on and so forth. So the question is, how do we deal with this? And I think this is an open question. I don't have an answer to that from an antitrust perspective. I do have better answers from an investor's perspective, right? We're investors. We want to, it's the purpose of our fund is to generate wealth. So we're investing in those types of companies. We're following those types of entrepreneurs, and we're employing our capital with them. But we also don't want to become, evil empires. And the question is, how do we prevent that? And the best way to prevent that is the same old, this goes back to the founding fathers of the United States. Like, if you want to have an open distributed system that is able to make mistakes and change its direction without violence, which is really what democracy and the sort of best solution from the Enlightenment are. It's, Popper defines democracy as a system that changes power without violence. So along those lines, I think that's what we want to see. We want to see checks and balances in place where mistakes can be made, where directions can be taken, where changes can be made without violence. Violence, of course, in a company context doesn't necessarily mean you kill each other. It just means that you can do it. You don't lose your job. Your career is not ruined if you make a mistake. Like, those sort of things need to be in place. Tesla is, in my opinion, not thinking too much about this, and that's fair enough. This is like paraphrasing Andrew Ng when he talked about AI. He said worrying about AI is like worrying about overpopulation on Mars. So worrying about market dominance of Tesla is kind of like that. It's a bit early. That's the point, right? But it's coming, and it's coming fast. And they're already dominating certain markets. I would say the electric vehicle market in California is dominated by Tesla, and the vehicle market in California is dominated by Tesla. And you'll see, let's say, Hilton is adopting the charging mechanism of Tesla, and they really have power. I mean, there will be a point when you're not going to stay in a Hilton or any kind of motel if they don't have Tesla chargers. And that's going to be, of course, power that Tesla has that they need to deal with. And again, I think the best way to do this is to almost have a constitution. Maybe that's what they should, and this would be one of my suggestions, is that Tesla should maybe have a constitution. Now, they have a manifesto, they have those plans, and but those are business plans, right? What I'm talking about is very much in light of the U.S. Constitution. The U.S. Constitution was not a business plan, how to make the U.S. the most powerful country in the world. It was a plan of how to manage this country, how to manage distributed power and wealth creation. And I think it would be useful to have something like that, to think about this. This also shows how some of the humanities that a lot of people are maybe frowning upon, like political economy, economics, and the law in general, or constitutional law, those types of disciplines actually are important. We need people to think about these problems. It's not just enough to calculate things, and it's not enough just to come up with new engineering solutions to problems. Those are great things, and we need that. But we also need people to think about, okay, how should we organize a company that is going to be a $5 to $10 trillion company? When companies become GDP size level, we're not talking about big players anymore. We're talking about companies that are bigger than countries in terms of sales, in terms of profits, in terms of wealth creation. They have a responsibility to themselves, to their investors, and to society to act as something that is not destructive. I don't want to say good citizens, because that's a loaded word these days. What does that even mean? I absolutely am against companies becoming political. That's different. I'm not talking about the climate change or gender politics that companies should get involved in. Companies are in the business of solving problems that are driven by technology, at least those types that we invest in. And that's what they should keep doing. And they should try to always find the most productive channel towards solving a problem. And if that means vertical integration, they should do it. And if that means market power, they should have it. The question is, what do they do with it? And the market power is, what does it actually mean? It means things like, well, you don't want to squeeze your suppliers, right? You don't want to, you want to let them make some money. You want to let your investors make some money. You want to let your employees make some money. Everybody, it's to some extent, I hate the word communism, but it has kind of that feel, right? In a sense that we are all in this together, and we're trying to, we need to split the pie. And those are difficult questions, because you don't want to fall back into some sort of communism, of course, even if it's driven by a company, because you don't want equality and equity and those sort of things in the company, because you want the strong and the winners to win and get rewarded for that, and the weak to be weeded out. Like that's what productivity means. But you want to not be within that context. You still want to act like something that has long-term future, I would say. And again, I think driven by fast iteration, making errors, fixing those errors, low error correction, low cost of errors, those are the things that you want to drive. But you want to find solutions to how to deal with the market power. So to conclude, we have an antitrust conversation today, which is driven by, to some extent, already going in that direction. We call it big tech and so on and so forth. My contribution is that I think I have a better way to look at this from okay, what are the drivers of this? The drivers of this are higher productivity, and higher productivity, companies with higher productivity will dominate markets, and they will dominate more than just tech markets. They will dominate all the markets. This is an economics version of Software Eats the World, and we have the responsibility as investors, as citizens, to think about this. The companies have the responsibility to think about this in terms of the market power that they were going to have.